How is everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We check out great theories, discoveries, concepts that you probably don't know anything about because they've been suppressed and marginalized. Powers that be don't want you to know about this stuff because it is uh, something that could help you with your physical, mental, spiritual health. And this is, I believe, number 399 of our Bible Decode series. These are things that your priest and pastor, your rabbi and minister will not tell you, even if you ask. These are things that actually, if you ask, they will probably rebuke you for not having faith and maybe even being possessed by Satan. Um, most of our Bible Decode series has been used to probe the ins and outs of the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament, um, because I believe that this is a crucial matter as far as moving forward with this info war, moving forward into the so-called Golden Age. The Roman origins hypothesis is that the New Testament was actually written by the Romans as a psychological operation. It was written by the Flavian dynasty of Caesars in the late 1st century in order to domesticate or tame the Jews, who were a big pain in the side of the Romans ever since the Romans had occupied Judea in 63 BC. So for over 100 years, the Jews had been revolting, uprising, plotting, and insurrecting, and eventually absolutely warring against the Romans, starting in 66 AD. That was the War of the Jews, 66 to 73 AD. It took the Romans 7 years to put down the revolt. And they had to kill like 1 million Jews in order to do so, at least according to the history that is provided by Josephus. Now, that history is very central to this story. But just to let you know, the Flavian dynasty of Caesars, Flavian means golden. So that might be relevant when we're thinking about walking into the golden age. Are we walking into another age of the Caesars? Because if we have Christianity in tow, that is exactly where we're going to be walking. Now, what the Romans did is they wrote the Gospels first, and they backdated the story by 40 years, placing Jesus' life at the second half, or you know, the years in the second half of the reign of Emperor Tiberius in the late 20s and early 30s AD. And at the same time, they wrote the history of this war called War of the Jews, and they wrote that under the name of Josephus. Now, we don't exactly know who Josephus was. Most historians believe that he was a real person. But if you read his autobiography, there's a lot of fanciful and even supernatural stuff in really all of the things that has written. And he's a very questionable source, but unfortunately, historians have to really lean on Josephus because in a lot of cases, he's the only source that we have for a lot of events and of ancient history. But we do know that Josephus's books were 7 volumes of War of the Jews, 20 volumes of Jewish antiquities that came out later, but they were all endorsed, full throated endorsements from the Caesars. And that even according to his autobiography, Josephus was living and writing at Caesar's palace in a townhouse that he was granted them. And he was actually adopted as a member of the Roman royal family. He is known as Flavius Josephus, even though he is originally apparently of Jewish extraction, and that he was a military commander in this war, but eventually surrendered to Vespasian, the Roman general, who eventually becomes the new emperor. And when he surrendered, he gave Vespasian the star prophecy, which is supposed to be reserved only for Jews. But he gave it to Vespasian, saying that I foresee that one day you will become the new emperor. And so when Vespasian did become the new emperor, he hooked up Josephus by pardoning him and bringing him to Rome, setting him up at a townhouse in Caesar's palace. And the rest is history, or at least a psychological operation. This story is very difficult to believe and goes against Roman custom. They usually take the enemies and drag them by their hair through the streets of Rome in a big parade after the war is over. So for them to take a Jewish commander and put him into Caesar's palace and adopt him as a member of the family strains credulity. But that is not the only thing about Josephus that strains credulity. If you read his War of the Jews, you will see that Vespasian's son Titus, who eventually becomes the new military commander once Vespasian becomes the new emperor, Titus's military campaign in Judea is documented in Josephus. And his military campaign is identical to Jesus's ministry in the Gospels. And that is not the only parallel. There are literally thousands of parallels between the two works. They're meant to be read together, intertextually, and they bounce off each other. One is parodying the other, and then the other parodies it right back. And the parallels are too numerous to even document, and you're unable to ignore them once you know what you're looking for. The prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are fulfilled in the pages of War of the Jews, especially the prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem, which was supposed to be the marker of the second coming of the Son of Man. And that destruction of Jerusalem was wrought by Titus, making Titus the second coming of the Son of Man. The Romans literally wrote themselves into the Jewish lineage as the end point of, the end of the world. And, they intended to put Judaism to an end with this. They also use a great deal of mockery and derision and ridicule of the Jews and anybody who believes in the psychological operation. And those that mockery is a signature of the Romans, and it is something that um, you know serves as strong evidence that the Romans, fingerprints were all over this. This is exactly what the Romans would do. This is exactly what the Romans had done. The Romans had created a number of other religions at this very same time for psychological purposes, including another psyop that they worked on the Jews, but a different group of Jews. Christianity was really targeted toward the zealous Jews, the ones that were involved in the uprisings and the insurrections. But the Pharisaic Jews were targeted more by what is known as rabbinical Judaism, which was also founded by the Flavians. So it's not, obviously, this is not coming out of nowhere. This is uh, the Romans were masters of psychological warfare. Um, and so this just fits the overall pattern. Um, there are literally a dozen authors out there in the last 50 years who have written about this, but you probably have never heard of any of them because you haven't done any of the proper digging. But you would start out with Joseph Atwill's Caesar's Messiah and Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, and Michael Menescott's new book called Christianity's Origin as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. The parallels are documented in those two works, and the odds are overwhelming. The evidence is overwhelming. If you are a follower of the 17th letter, um, and you are satisfied that the 17th letter has proven itself, then this Roman origin hypothesis proves itself 100 times over. So you don't have to believe me. Just go get yourself a copy of Josephus online for free. And go get yourself a copy of Atwill's books, which you also can get online for free. And although I suggest that you pay the author, and that you can get Michael Menescott's articles online for free, which basically put together his book, although I would also recommend that you buy his book. But, like I said, you don't have to believe me. Now, what we're working on in this episode is to continue to move through Kersey Graves's book from 1876 that is called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christianity. And this book documents a lot of the Roman source material that they used to construct these Gospels. The Romans literally threw in everything but the kitchen sink into the Gospels. They put in Egyptian mythology and religion, Persian mythology and religion, mystery schools, alchemy, astrology, magic. Um, they put in, did I say astrology? Yeah, I think I did. Ancient Indian mythology and religion, Chinese mythology and religion, Japanese, also maybe even some Norse stuff, Greek and Roman philosophy, Stoicism, cynicism, also Greek and Roman mythology and religion, and obviously Jewish Old Testament lore. All of it's in there, along with a very heavy dose of mockery, derision, and so a little bit of pornography as well. It's there to mock you. And Kersey Graves documents some of the source material for kind of every different episode that Jesus goes through, you know, the virgin birth and the magi coming to worship him, and the having to flee to Egypt and having to come back, and then as a 12-year-old, you know, getting lost in Jerusalem at the temple, and um, all of these different stories all have antecedents that are much older than Christianity, and that's where the Romans got it from. There isn't anything original in the New Testament except for the mockery stuff. But all of the stuff that is related to the religion, all of this stuff is derivative of much older sources. We're in the middle of chapter 30 here, which has to do with cycles, time cycles. He talks about a 600-year cycle, that every 600 years some avatars or messiahs or gods, corporeal gods, come forward, and then he tries to kind of um, combine this 600-year cycle with the 2,160-year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes, which I'm certainly more familiar with, but we'll go from here. The Egyptians marked their houses with red to indicate that the world would be destroyed by fire. Orpheus, approximately 1200 BC, at the inauguration of the eighth cycle, entertained fearful forebodings of the speedy destruction of the world by water or fire. Some nations held that the alternate destruction of the world by water and fire had already occurred and would occur again. Theopompus informs us that some of the Orientalists believed that, quote, the god of light and the god of darkness reigned by turn every 6,000 years, commencing with an astronomical cycle, of course, and that during this period, the other was held in subjection, which finally resulted in a war in heaven, a counterpart to St. John's story in Revelation chapter 12. This accords with Alexander de Volney's statement that it was recorded in the sacred books of the Persians and Chaldeans that the world, composed of a total revolution of 12,000 periods, was divided into two partial revolutions of 6,000 years each, one being the reign of good and the other the reign of evil. This belief was disseminated through most of the nations. One of these revolutions was produced, some believe, by a concussion of worlds, which displaced the oceans and seas, and thus produced a general flood, which drowned every living thing on the earth. The next revolution will be caused by a collision of worlds, which will produce fire and burn the earth to ashes. Now, let it be noted that all these grand epochs were founded on cycles and accompanied by the tradition of a god being born upon the earth, conceived by a virgin maid, or descending in person. That is, men were promoted to the Godhead. And in this way, Jesus Christ was deified. Volney explains the matter thus, quote, now, according to the Jewish computation, 6,000 years had nearly elapsed since the supposed creation of the world, according to their chronology. Well, I thought their calendar started at like 3760 BC. Maybe that is post Noah. Not really sure, but that would put us at about 6,000 years, as opposed to Jesus at about 6,000 years. If you add in the Noah, pre-Noah stuff, you're still only at about 5,400 years. So then that would put it Muhammad, really, as the 6,000 year cap. But regardless, um, this coincidence produced considerable fermentation in the minds of the people. Nothing was thought of but the approaching termination. The great mediator and final judge was expected, and his advent desired that an end might be put to their calamities. Mr. Higgins corroborates this statement when he tells us that about the time of the Caesars, there seems to have been a general expectation that some great one was to appear. I wonder why that was. Maybe it was that the Caesars were spreading the rumor. And finally, when the cycle had passed, the people, the Jew Christians, began to look about to see who that great one was. Some fixed on Herod, some on Julius Caesar, and some on others. But finally, public opinion settled on one Jesus of Nazareth. On account of his superiority in morals and intellect, while the Hindus deified Salabhana, the Greeks Apollonius, etc. And thus science and history joined hand in hand to explain most beautifully and conclusively the greatest mystery that ever brought 200 millions of people daily upon their knees, the apotheosis or deification of the man, Jesus Christ. Now, back in 1876, when Graves is writing this, he is not aware of the Roman origins hypothesis, even though he could have been, because there were people that were aware of it at this time. But so he believes that Jesus was an actual person who was just undeservedly deified, but just an exemplary person. But the research really shows that he never existed, and that, or maybe that he was based on people who did exist, or a person who did exist, um, but that ultimately the story is a fiction. Okay, now that is the end of chapter 30. Chapter 31 is called Christianity Derived from Heathen and Oriental Systems. And I think we'll try to see if we can get at least through the first section here. More than 20,000 sermons are preached in the Christian pulpits on every recurring Sabbath to convince the people that the religion and morality taught and practiced by Jesus Christ was of divine emanation and was never before taught in the world, that his system of morality was without a parallel, and his practical life without a precedent, that the doctrine of self-denial, humility, unselfishness, benevolence, and charity, also devout piety, kind treatment of enemies, and love for the human race, which he preached and practiced, had never before been exemplified in the life and teachings of any individual or nation. But a thorough acquaintance with the history and moral systems of some of the Oriental nations, and the practical lives of piety and self-denial exemplified in their leading men long anterior to the birth of Christ, and long before the name of Christianity was anywhere known, must convince any unprejudiced mind that such a claim is without foundation. And to prove it, we will here institute a critical comparison between Christianity and some of the older systems with respect to the essential spirit of their teachings, and observe how utterly untenable and groundless is the dogmatic assumption which claims for the Christian religion either any originality or any superiority. Of course, if there is nothing new or original, there is nothing superior. We will first arrange Christianity side by side with the ancient system known as Essenism or Essenism. Now, the Essenes were claimed to be you know, some Christians believe that Jesus was an Essene. The Essenes were a very strict sect of Jews who lived at this time. Problem is that um, the Essenes are also a fiction. The only sources that um, discuss the Essenes are Josephus, Philo, and um, I believe Pliny the Elder, some other Roman. Mainly, what I'm saying is that it's a made up, it's another Roman psychological operation. The Romans are the only people that have ever, Roman royals, people of the Roman royal court, are the only people that have ever vouched for the existence of the Essenes. So, but he's looking at now. Josephus talks about them quite a bit in his, I guess that's in War of the Jews. Um, but we will first arrange Christianity side by side with the ancient system known as Essenism, a religion whose origin has never been discovered, though it is known that the Essenes existed in the days of Jonathan Maccabeus, BC 150, and that they were of Jewish origin and constituted one of the three Jewish sects, the other two being the Pharisees and Sadducees. We have but fragments of their history as furnished by Philo, Josephus, and Pliny the Elder, and their copyists, Eusebius, who is way forward in the fourth century, early fourth century, Dr. Ginsburg, and others, on whose authority we will proceed to show that Alexandrian and Judean Essenism was identically the same system in spirit and essence as its successor, Judean Christianity. In other words, Judean Christianity teaches the same doctrines and moral precepts which had been previously inculcated by the disciples of the Essenian religion. Okay, we're going to stop right there. He's going to be spinning around in circles here in this chapter because he's comparing something that is fake with something else that is fake. Um, so we'll see where he goes tomorrow. But you know, it's like he's got one psychological operation on one hand and another psychological operation on the other hand, and he is going to show that one comes from the other. And so he's really spinning his wheels here. Um, we'll see how he makes it. It should be exciting when we return tomorrow. But for today, we're going to stop right here. And you can like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute. And come back tomorrow for episode number 400 of the Bible Decode series with Kersey Graves' 16 Crucified Saviors, chapter 31. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.